Subscribe to the channel and share in the comments where you're tuning in from. Now, let's step into today's story. There are mornings in St. Mary Mead when the world seems to breathe in perfect rhythm. The stone cottages stand as they have for generations, their chimneys trailing thin, pale ribbons of smoke into the cool air. The cobbled streets still glisten with the remnants of early mist, and the fragrance of warm bread drifts lazily from the corner bakery on mornings like this. The village appears immovable, a place where nothing unexpected dares intrude. Yet Miss Marple has lived long enough to know that even in the most well-ordered places, mischief finds a way of slipping quietly through the cracks. That Thursday began with the gentle clink of china in her tidy kitchen and the soft thump of the Times upon her doorstep. She had been tending her roses at first light, persuading a stubborn branch to climb neatly along the trellis. A robin, bold and inquisitive, hopped close to her boots. It was in this calm occupation that she heard the brisk crunch of approaching footsteps. Miss Hartnell, a stout figure with a flushed face and the air of one who never let the village go a moment without news, appeared at the garden gate. "Miss Marple," she called, breathless, "you'll never guess. Felicity Ambrose has returned." Miss Marple straightened slowly, brushing earth from her gloves. She had already heard the name murmured in the grocer's shop, a name once spoken with equal parts admiration and suspicion. Felicity Ambrose, widow of an ex-colonel long absent from the village, reputed for her refined tastes and exacting standards. "She's hosting a garden luncheon this Sunday," Miss Hartnell continued, handing over a stiff ivory card. The handwriting was neat, almost military in its precision. "Invitations have gone out, 12 guests, all in her garden." 12, Miss Marple murmured, studying the card. A deliberate number indeed. By Sunday, the Ambrose estate gleamed like a page torn from a fashion magazine. Gravel paths sparkled with fresh white stones, and chairs were arranged in flawless arcs beneath pale parasols. The table glittered under the weight of fine bone china, polished silver, and tall glasses that caught the sunlight like prisms. The guests arrived with punctual politeness. The Reverend and Mrs. Calthorpe, Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker from the new estate, the extravagantly dressed Miss Weatherby, and a reserved newcomer, Mr. Selwyn, an artist who had taken the converted mill house. Miss Marple was shown to her seat by a pale young maid whose lowered eyes and delicate hands betrayed a nervous determination to do everything precisely. Felicity Ambrose presided at the head of the table, her silver hair immaculate, her pearls flawless, her smile gracious, though to a practiced observer just a touch too rehearsed. Conversation moved smoothly over soup and wine. There was mention of the roses, complaints about the post office's limited hours, and Mr. Churchill's latest broadcast. It was all very proper, all very expected, save for one detail. Midway down the table, a single place remained untouched. A napkin folded, the glass untouched, the chair conspicuously vacant. Miss Marple noticed, but remained silent. She knew the most revealing details were best left to ripen unspoken. Dessert was served, and Felicity, with a rueful smile, remarked, Major Lytton had accepted, of course, but something must have delayed him. There was no annoyance in her voice, only a pause heavy with unspoken history. The guests nodded politely, allowing the moment to drift away. It was not until the next day that the stillness of St. Mary Mead trembled. Young Billy Cooper, the paperboy and part-time bearer of unwelcome tidings, appeared at Miss Marple's doorstep. "They found him," he burst out. "Major Lytton dead in his own chair." She set down her teacup with a steadiness that belied her racing thoughts. A man as precise as Major Lytton did not simply miss a luncheon, nor abandon his daily rituals without cause. By the time word spread to the post office line and the baker's counter, the 13th seat at Felicity's table had already become a subject of hushed fascination. Some whispered of superstition. Others wondered if it was merely oversight. Miss Marple, however, understood that deliberate order often concealed deliberate intent. In the days that followed, the village hummed with speculation. Whispers circled about Elsie, the maid not local, eyes too shrewd, and said to have quarreled recently with the major. Others pointed toward Mr. Selwyn, the reclusive painter who shrouded his windows and shunned conversation. Yet gossip, Miss Marple reflected, was like ivy quick to creep, slow to reveal what it truly covered. She observed the small things. The glance Felicity cast at the untouched glass, the slight tightening of her fingers at the mention of the Major's name, the careful way she poured the wine herself. She overheard mention of a solicitor's letter that had reached the Major, only days before his death. And then, through a trusted whisper, she learned Felicity's name had once appeared in the Major's will and had lately been erased. Still, the village chatter clung to superstition and scandal, blind to the simpler, darker truth. There had been too many seats at the table before there were too few. Miss Marple had lived long enough to know that murder seldom declared itself. It seeped quietly into the fabric of daily life, into the pattern of a luncheon, the pour of a glass, the absence of one guest who perhaps was never meant to arrive. By week's end, she was certain of two things. Major Lytton's death was no accident, and the key lay not in what was present that Sunday, but in what had been quietly removed. And so, in her unobtrusive manner, she began to unpick the neat stitches of Felicity Ambrose's carefully staged luncheon, knowing that beneath the lace and polished silver, something sharp and dangerous lay hidden. Miss Marple began her inquiries without ceremony. In a place like St. Mary Mead, the direct question often drove people into rehearsed replies, but a casual remark over the greengrocer's scales or a pause in the post office queue could yield fragments that formal questioning never would. The first point she addressed was the luncheon itself. She set out to reconstruct, step by step, how each detail had been arranged, not from memory alone, but from the recollections of those who had attended, Mrs. Calthorpe recalled. Arriving to find the table already fully laid, with Felicity Ambrose moving among the places to ensure that everything was exact. The maid, Elsie, admitted she had set 13 places under instruction, but shortly before the guests sat down, Felicity told her to remove one setting, quietly and without fuss. This was the first confirmed fact. The 13th place had been deliberate from the start, not a slip or oversight. That detail, Miss Marple knew, was significant. From there, she examined the location of the empty chair. It had been placed midway down the table, not near the hostess's seat, where an absence might be easily explained, but in a position that blended seamlessly into the symmetry of the arrangement. In photographs of formal luncheons, the kind Felicity had long presided over in earlier years, this sort of balance was intentional. Removing the chair at the last moment would have escaped most eyes, yet it allowed the glass and plate to be repurposed without suspicion. Miss Marple cross-checked with those who had served. Elsie remembered that the wine had been poured by Felicity herself, not by the maid. This seemed courteous at the time, but in practice it gave her complete control over which glass went to which guest. The empty chair's glass was poured early and remained untouched until the adjustment of the seating. The question then became, who was meant to occupy that place? Felicity's explanation to the table that Major Lytton had been delayed did not match his well-known punctuality, nor the fact that he had accepted the invitation in writing. His absence could not have been anticipated unless the hostess already knew he would not arrive for the beginning of the meal. What stood out most was the timing of the day. Several guests confirmed seeing Felicity in quiet conversation with the Major near the garden's rose arch before the luncheon formally began. No voices were raised, but the tone had been strained. The exchange clipped. Moments later, he was observed returning toward the house along the far path while Felicity lingered at the table, adjusting the settings. Elsie's testimony gave this added weight. She described Felicity's hand trembling slightly as she poured wine into the unused glass, and again when she shifted it toward the Major's seat after instructing her to remove the 13th place. Miss Marple then turned her eye to the physical evidence. Constable Drake reported that a bottle of chloral hydrate sleeping tablets had been discovered in the Major's desk drawer, inscribed with Clara Lytton's initials. At first glance, this seemed incriminating, but the village chemist's ledger showed the tablets had been purchased not by Clara, but by Felicity Ambrose 10 days before the luncheon. This was the second confirmed fact. The poison's origin could be traced directly to Felicity, despite the misleading label. Miss Marple now held two crucial threads: the deliberate creation of a 13th place, and Felicity's exclusive control over the poisoned glass. But she still needed to uncover motive. That came from the solicitor's assistant, Mr. Denham, who revealed that the Major had recently altered his will. Felicity's considerable bequest had been struck out, entirely redirected to Clara with a note explaining the change as made in light of recent revelations. The timing was precise.
The will had been amended in the fortnight before the luncheon, and the revision would have been fresh in Felicity's mind as she welcomed her guests. Losing the inheritance was not merely a financial blow. In a village where status was currency, it threatened to strip away her standing altogether. By confirming the sequence, the change to the will, the tension before the meal, the control of the glass, and the deliberate removal of the 13th place, Miss Marple established a pattern. This had not been a crime of impulse. It was planned with precision, using the appearance of tradition and order to disguise the fatal dose without open suspicion. She had uncovered the framework. Now she turned to the deeper history between Felicity and Major Lytton, aware that the surface motive might be only part of the truth. With the luncheon sequence settled, Miss Marple shifted her focus to the past ties linking Felicity Ambrose and Major Lytton. In St. Mary Mead, history was rarely lost. It lingered in memories exchanged over tea and in anecdotes shared across shop counters. This made it possible to reconstruct the nature of their relationship long before the luncheon in question. The Reverend Calthorpe's wife recalled that during the war, Felicity and Major Lytton had been engaged. Several villagers confirmed that the engagement ended abruptly after his return from service overseas in Burma. The reason was never spoken openly, but Miss Marple heard two prevailing versions: one, that Felicity ended the engagement to marry Colonel Ambrose; the other, that Major Lytton returned a changed man, unwilling to proceed. From a practical view, Miss Marple noted the important facts. Felicity and Major Lytton had once been personally close. Their parting was not amicable, and the bitterness seemed to have endured for decades. The alteration of Lytton's will, cutting Felicity's bequest, suggested a deliberate severing of any remaining tie. There was also the matter of the solicitor's letter from Bath, which had reached the Major only days before his death. Though its contents were not widely known, the bank manager, Mr. Fenwick, confirmed that Lytton had visited to finalize legal documents in that same period. The will change was directly linked to these dealings, and Felicity would almost certainly have been aware of its effect, if not by formal notice, then through the close observation typical of village life. Miss Marple weighed whether the motive was purely financial. In her experience, such acts often sprang from pride, reputation, and control as much as from money. For Felicity, whose standing in the village rested on her late husband's title and her image of tradition, the loss of a large inheritance implied public humiliation. The more Miss Marple pieced together, the clearer it became that the luncheon had not been a casual affair. It was a stage chosen by Felicity, familiar, controlled, and orderly, where she could dictate the seating, the service, and most of all, the pouring of wine. The next thread came through Clara Lytton. Clara confided to Miss Marple, during a quiet walk near the post office, that her uncle had often said the worst things in life were those one had to endure afterward. She described him as a solitary man who avoided speaking of the past. Her tone suggested that something recent weighed heavily upon him. Miss Marple suspected this was tied to the discovery of a truth that compelled him to amend his will. She began to suspect the alteration was not an act of simple spite, but the consequence of a grave revelation about Felicity's past, something that threatened her claim to position, and perhaps even to her late husband's estate. To confirm this, Miss Marple revisited her earlier conversation with the artist, Mr. Selwyn. His painting of the Ambrose house garden depicted two men, one clearly Major Lytton, the other unfamiliar to most villagers. Selwyn remarked that Felicity had recognized the man at once. This implied a personal connection, and in a village as small as St. Mary Mead, such recognition was significant. Step by step, the background took shape. Felicity and Major Lytton's history had long carried personal tension. Lytton had uncovered something in her past that drove him to strike her from his will. The luncheon occurred in the narrow interval after this discovery, giving Felicity both motive and opportunity. Miss Marple now saw that the luncheon had not been a convenient occasion, but a carefully chosen stage for an act designed to appear as nothing more than an unfortunate absence. The history between hostess and victim was not incidental. It was the very heart of why the plan had been conceived and executed as it was. The next phase of her inquiry would be to discover precisely what Major Lytton had learned, and why such knowledge was perilous enough to provoke murder. Miss Marple's next aim was to determine exactly what had come to light in the weeks before his death, the recent revelations that had led to the will's alteration, and almost certainly, to his demise. Her breakthrough arose from two separate but complementary sources, the village chemist, Mr. Travers, and the gossip network that thrived in the quieter corners of St. Mary Mead. From Mr. Travers's ledger, Miss Marple confirmed that the chloral hydrate tablets later found in Lytton's desk, bearing a label marked with Clara Ara's initials, had not been purchased by Clara Ara at all, but by Felicity Ambrose herself. The purchase had been made 10 days before the luncheon, Felicity claiming headaches and strain. This erased any plausible connection between Clara Ara and the procurement of the poison. More importantly, it revealed deliberate forethought by Felicity to secure the means of murder well in advance of the crime. The more intricate clue came from an unlikely source, the village librarian, Miss Bell. She remarked that Clara Ara had lately returned a book to the library, a military memoir titled The Retreat of Empire, which had belonged to her uncle. When Miss Marple asked to see it, she found tucked inside a folded photograph. The picture showed a woman in a summer dress, a ribbon held to her lips, her gaze intent and watchful. At first glance, the likeness to Felicity Ambrose was striking, but subtle differences hinted it was not the same woman, or more telling still, not the same version of the woman the village now knew. The photograph seemed to date back 10 or more years. This prompted Miss Marple to revisit her conversation with Mr. Selwyn about his painting of the Ambrose house garden. The second man shown in the figure in the painting, turned partly away, had been identified by Felicity without hesitation as someone she knew. Selwyn had glimpsed the man only briefly near the house, and assumed afterward he had imagined it. But Miss Marple linked this sighting to the discovery Major Lytton had made. The man was believed to be Colonel Ambrose, Felicity's husband, declared missing and presumed drowned years earlier. If Colonel Ambrose still lived, Felicity's marriage to him had never legally ended. Any claims she made as his widow, including property and position, would be invalid. More than that, her marriage to the colonel had been the foundation of her status in the village and the source of her social authority. This explained why Major Lytton's revelations had been so destructive. The survival, or reappearance, of Colonel Ambrose meant a public and legal collapse of Felicity's life. It also explained the urgency. If Lytton intended to make the truth known, she had to silence him before he could act. Miss Marple now held the essential elements: Felicity's direct purchase of the poison, the staged 13th place as the device for slipping it into the wine unnoticed, the existence of a living husband that nullified her standing, and Lytton's decision to strike her from his will immediately upon learning the fact. The photograph and the painting were not merely supporting evidence. They were visual records of the truth Felicity had sought to erase. They proved the man presumed dead had been seen near Ambrose house shortly before the luncheon. This gave her motive absolute weight. Felicity was not merely protecting an inheritance, she was fighting for the entirety of the identity she had built. Exposure meant not only financial loss, but total social collapse. With motive secured in her mind, Miss Marple's next step was to test her theory against the day's timeline, ensuring that each movement, each glass, and each opportunity aligned with Felicity's ability to carry out the crime. Having established Felicity's motive and means, Miss Marple now needed to confirm that the sequence of events on the day of the luncheon allowed her to execute the plan without contradiction. The timeline had to align seamlessly from the moment the guests arrived to the point when Major Lytton drank the poisoned wine. From multiple accounts, the guests began arriving at Ambrose house shortly before 1 o'clock. Elsie, the maid, confirmed she had set the table that morning under Felicity's eye, laying 13 places exactly as directed. The silver, china, and glasses had been arranged with perfect symmetry, and the wine was set aside for pouring. The first deviation came after Felicity's brief exchange with Major Lytton in the garden. Elsie observed a change in her manner when she returned to the table. Felicity instructed her to remove one place, specifically the chair midway down the table, and to do so discreetly. The removal was no accident. It matched the position of the glass Felicity had poured earlier, a glass into which poison could have been introduced without detection. The luncheon commenced with 12 seated guests. Felicity retained full control over the wine service, refilling glasses herself, including placing the pre-poured phantom guest's glass before Major Lytton. Seat. This transfer occurred just before the soup course, ensuring that no one would notice any irregularity in the order of pouring. The glass itself became a silent instrument. At gatherings of this kind, guests seldom tracked the precise glass they drank from once seated. The exchange could be made in seconds without drawing attention, masked easily by the distraction of polite conversation. Miss Marple reviewed reports from the other guests. None recalled anything unusual in Major Lytton's manner during the meal. He spoke little, appeared thoughtful at moments, but betrayed no sign of discomfort. The effect of chloral hydrate, especially when combined with alcohol, would unfold gradually, first drowsiness, then a deeper, dangerous sedation. By late afternoon, Littun had returned to his cottage. This aligned with the expected timeline for the drug's more serious effects, leaving him unable to summon aid. His body was later discovered seated in his chair, windows closed, the milk delivery untouched since the previous day. The second point Miss Marple cross-checked was the positioning of the serving staff. Elsie and another housemaid assisted with clearing plates but never touched the wine after seating began. This ruled out the possibility of anyone else introducing poison once the luncheon was underway. Felicity's sole control over the wine service was confirmed in every account. Then came the curious disappearance of the vicarage guest book days afterward. To Miss Marple, this was no mere accident. The book would have held the original list of invitees, possibly showing a 13th name, or an omission proving the phantom place had never been meant for a real guest. Its theft erased a vital piece of physical evidence linking the seating arrangement to the scheme. By mapping the timeline against Felicity's opportunities, Miss Marple confirmed there were no contradictions undermining her theory. The plan hinged on two key manipulations: the visual trick of an extra place setting removed just before the meal, creating the chance to repurpose the poisoned glass unnoticed, and the social control Felicity maintained over the pouring of wine, ensuring the poisoned glass reached Major Littun directly. Every moment of the day supported these manipulations. No one else possessed both the motive and the access to accomplish them without detection. With the mechanics of the act established, Miss Marple's next task was to draw all the principal figures together, not for a public accusation, but to present the truth in a setting where denial would prove difficult to maintain. She chose the vicarage drawing room for this final step. It was neutral ground, familiar to all, and discreet enough to contain the matter without it becoming village gossip. She sent quiet notes to Clara Littun, Mr. Selwyn, Constable Drake, Reverend Calthorpe, and Felicity Ambrose, inviting them to attend for clarification regarding the circumstances of Major Littun's death. When they were gathered, Miss Marple remained standing by the window. Her tone was composed, her voice steady, but each word was deliberate. She began with the sequence of the luncheon. 13 places had been set exactly as Elsie testified, with one removed just before the meal began. That removal, she explained, was not superstition or oversight. It was a deliberate step designed to place a pre-poured poisoned glass into the setting of a guest without arousing suspicion. She then presented the facts in sequence. Felicity's control of the wine service, the transfer of the phantom guest's glass to Major Littun's seat, the calculated purchase of chloral hydrate 10 days beforehand, and the theft of the vicarage guest book to erase any trace of the seating plan. Each detail was backed by at least 2 independent accounts or records, leaving no room for alternative theories. The motive followed. Miss Marple stated clearly that Major Littun had recently discovered Colonel Ambrose, long thought drowned, was alive. His survival destroyed Felicity's claim to widowhood, and with it much of her social and legal authority. Within days of learning this, the Major altered his will, striking out her inheritance. That was the revelation referred to in the solicitor's note, and it was enough to force swift action before he could make the truth known. She linked this to the visual evidence, the photograph concealed in the Major's book and the painting in Mr. Selwyn's studio. Both showed a man Felicity recognized instantly, though she refused to name him. Major Littun had recognized him as well, and that moment was the fulcrum of all that followed. Miss Marple concluded without raising her tone. The luncheon was chosen because it gave Felicity complete command over setting, service, and timing. The poisoned glass was never intended to be traced, and the absence of a 13th guest was explained away so smoothly that no one questioned it until death made the details matter. She turned toward Felicity. It was not clumsy, Mrs. Ambrose. It was precise. But precision cannot erase what has already been seen and understood. Felicity did not protest. She sat motionless, hands folded, eyes fixed on the table. When she spoke, it was low. She said she had acted not for wealth, but to defend the life she had built, a life that would collapse with the return of a truth she had believed buried. She asked for no sympathy, only admitted she would make a statement. Clara sat silent, relief mixed with exhaustion. Mr. Selwyn kept his gaze from Felicity, his hands still upon his knees. Constable Drake inclined his head once, knowing the matter would be formalized without further village spectacle. When the gathering ended, Miss Marple remained a moment longer in the quiet room, gazing out over the vicarage garden. Afternoon light lay across the trimmed hedges and rose beds, steady and unbroken, as though nothing of consequence had just been resolved there.